joy of planting. Just give me 1 second while I get my phone set up. I can get the chat in on that. So it's a little easier to follow along with follow along what folks are saying. Perfect. There we go. So anyway, this is going to be for folks who have watched a lot of the episodes. This is going to be a little bit of a different focused one, with the rookie design contest opening up. I figured I would design or target a Joy of Planting episode after more kind of rookie designers that are looking for like some pseudo tutorial stuff. So I have this little kind of goofy municipal project that I'm working on that I think would fit perfectly because it has a solid look to it in my opinion, but as far as golf courses are considered in this game, or as far as they go in this game, it's pretty basic. So it's just a short little. No, I don't want to start on 3. I want to do a quick playthrough of what I've got so far. So obviously still rough around the edges, but like I need to do the heavy rough stuff for 2, but 1 and 3 are close to being done. And they're just like this one's just a really simple opening hole, about 380. Just, 1 fairway bunker, 2 greenside bunkers. It's pretty easy. But again, this is supposed to kind of feel like a municipal that you could go out and actually play. So the whole distances are going to be very short for this game. A lot of wedges and stuff. Again, I haven't done anything with the greens just yet, but I figure I'm going to keep them relatively simple. Maybe a tier or 2 in there, but pretty much just 1 tier with some gentle slopes. That's not what that one is supposed to do. There we go. But again, I haven't done any of the green sculpting yet. I'm just getting basic ideas down. And again, it's jumping into, hey look, it's a straightforward 165-yard par 3. I don't think I'm going to end up making the green speeds 163. It's a little fast for the kind of course that I'm aiming for here. I'm thinking either like upper 140s at most, maybe, and down into the 130s. That'd be a little slow, but again, we'll see what. I want them to feel slow for this game without being unputtable. So we might go upper 140s. Again, there's just nothing really crazy going on here yet. It's just, or I don't think there will really be anything too crazy with this one. Here's a borderline drivable par 4. Whoops. I have the wrong episode up on my phone. No. Shut up, phone. Alright, hopefully I didn't miss any comments. Oh, hey Dylan, how's it going? Ooh, that's rough. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not getting the live one. I'm just getting past broadcast. I don't know why. Yeah, that's rough. I'm sorry, man. That's a big bummer. Is your is it like an injury or something? It's all good. I was gonna say you've got like 2 weeks left. Possible tumor. Ooh, that's no good. Well, at the very least, if you're nipping it in the bud now, that's way better than having like cancer complications later. Hey Adam, how's it going? Exactly. So yeah, the theme of this one is keep it really simple and I want it to feel like something that you could go out and play. It also helps that that means that all everything I'm doing with the course itself is pretty simple, and I think it makes a pretty good tutorial course for some of the rookie guys that are looking for ooh, there's a chip. Yeah, I'm making a goofy little municipal course. It's gonna be fun. But again, it's gonna be a quick project because it's there's not a lot to it. And then I've got this for this course. What's a challenging par five? Like, oh no, you might have to hit like a 2 wood in. You should be okay. I wouldn't worry about that too much. I might have to move the tee up slightly for this one, but anyway, that one's not done yet. I just wanted to go through a quick tour of what I've got before I jump into um, starting a new hole and using that kind of as a tutorial on like very basic stuff. So if you're like a new designer and you're just hopping in, like my kind of first piece of advice is keep it simple when you're starting out. Like, there's a huge learning curve um, for the designer, and it's one of those where like it you can do whatever you want as a first project, but you might pick things up way easier first time around if you just kind of keep it a little like you don't try to get overly fancy with like design and like crazy elevation changes, lots of intricate planting, that sort of thing. Like you don't have to do all of that stuff to make a good course. It's all about like taking the basics and executing them well. Yes, again, you can do it. It's just difficult. And if you're like a complete newbie and you have no idea what you're doing, your first course is just going to be a lot of you getting your feet wet and getting a feel for that. So, sculpting. It's a very important part in my opinion of what makes a good course. Of if you sculpt it well, chances are the it'll play well and it'll look nice. So in this case, I have like the holes I've done, I've already smoothed out and done all of my sculpting manually. But so this sixth hole over here is basically untouched. This all out here is just the default terrain that the game generates. You can do stuff with that, like if you want to use the major movements of the land that's already there to make your holes, that's fine. I would still take like the smooth brush and use that to smooth out what's there. It's just that depending on if you're gonna completely wipe it out and make it much smoother, and then add all the sculpting in yourself later, you might use like a different size brush and use it more, versus if you're just trying to kind of go with the land and just smooth a little bit out of what's there. So in this case, I'm going to be a little more heavy-handed with my smoothing brush, because I want to just do it all myself. It's kind of smooth, subtle sculpting on this course, so I don't need to do anything too crazy. Alright, so this one, I think, let's see what, I can't remember how long this one is. This one is 340. Okay. So I might make this one a little longer, in all honesty, just because the first two holes, or the first two par fours, this one's like 370, and then this one's, I guess I did make a back tee box for that one that's less drivable, but this one's 350, and you can cut the corner and drive the green. So while I definitely want a handful of holes that are very drivable, I think I want to mix up the distances here, and I'm going to move my green waypoint a substantial distance, probably out here somewhere. And I'm going to move my fairway waypoint a little bit, so you'll probably be going and cutting the corner a little bit. So, assuming that the tee boxes are all back here, I can probably put like a tippy one here. That means driver, like master club driver off the back tees, will land about here. So that's the area you're interested in for your first hole. Like that's, like if you want to take driver out of the hands of the player, then you can't, you don't want them to be able to drive it there. Or if you do want them to be able to hit driver, but just have it be risky, then that's where you want to concentrate your hazards. So in this case, I might put a bunker there. I might, let's say, we're going to route the fairway out around this lake. And I'm going to put a big wide area of fairway here as a layup area. It's something I recommend doing, but I'm definitely emphasizing on this course because I want it to feel realistic. So lots of big wide layup areas. Let's see. And then, yeah, I think we can run the fairway up here a little bit. Probably put a bunker up on this bit right here, because I think that just, it'll play interesting, and I think it's just a nice visual spot for a bunker. And then, let's see, we'll probably continue to narrow it up until we hit the green up here. Something like this, I think. So as you can see, like the area that I'm throwing the fairway in is already mostly flat, but I can still go and take, say, this little nick in the pond there. I can go flatten that out a bit. I'm just going to raise it so that the fairway, I want to pull this fairway up off the pond level, just so that there's a little bit of a bank there. Something I see a lot of newer designers do is when they design a hole where they want the water to come into play, they go and they'll like run the fairway right up to the edge, and it'll sit at about water level. I think you can get the water to play in. Yeah, this is the city muni. Exactly. Maybe not those for in game, but that's the feel I'm going for. It'll be a nice muni, but it's still a muni. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and throw, before I forget, I'm going to add a tee box. You don't necessarily have to do all of this, at the beginning, but I just want to do that before I forget. I can play with those later. So, I have generally the idea of the whole shape I want. You don't have to use the measure tool for this, but I just like to do it for planning purposes. It lets me kind of visualize what I want to do, check and make sure all of the distances and stuff work. Okay, it gets 30 yards wide at its narrowest, and it stretches to almost 50 at its widest, which is fair. For an in-game course, that's on the very generous side, but that's kind of what I'm going for on this course, so that will work just fine. That being said, I think another mistake I see a lot of people make is they try to make their course very, very difficult. And I think making a course that is hard and fair in this game is very challenging. So, like, I see a lot of newbies go, all the scores are so low in this game. I'm gonna go make a course where par is a good score. That's just straight up not gonna work. In all honesty, it's like, first off, no matter how hard you make a course, someone will always, always, always shoot minus 14 on it. Unless it's just absolutely broken to the point where it's just no fun for anybody to play, including the people who are breaking par on it. So, you can make difficult score or courses, but just a score should never be your design objective. Like, you can have a difficulty in mind, but you should, it basically, you want a course to be tough but fair, emphasizing fair. If the course punishes players for good shots, then that's not a good course and it's not fun to play. So, and especially when you're starting out, like, even designing something that's tough but fair is very difficult, and I would kind of recommend erring on the side of easy when you're starting out. There's nothing wrong with a straightforward course, but something that's just gimmicky and broken is not fun to play. Exactly. Like, if you look at, I think, um, like Dario's courses, CSU golfer, for those of you who aren't familiar with him. His courses are just about as razor close as you can get to the just brutally unfair side of the spectrum and still work. Like, they're just incredibly difficult and on that razor edge of what's doable in this game. Like, he gets right up to that edge without falling over and making something just awful. And, when his stuff hosted the U.S. Open, I think the winning scores are still like minus 30, minus 40, something like that. It's just, you can't make a course where par is a good score without it being stupid. So just don't try. It sounds mean, but just, it is what it is. That's the wrong objective. Also, USGA, if you're listening, that's the U.S. Open. Come on, par is irrelevant. Stop ruining your courses trying to get a target score for the winning score. Come on, guys. It's stupid when they do it in real life, and it's even harder to pull off in this game. So, I wouldn't go for that. Again, if you want to make like U.S. Open, championship course, but like, if that's your thing, you can definitely make those at some point. It's just par is not going to be like, the good players are still going to go shoot minus 10 on it easy. But it'll still be hard. Most people will shoot nowhere near that, and it is what it is. So, all right. What else? So as you can see there, I just kind of just generally traced out what I want to do with my green, and then and just kind of threw the spline down. So for greens, and this is another thing, I see a lot of newbies, they make their greens either really, really small or really, really big. It's there's there's a fairly wide range of good greens that you can make in this game, but generally, like you have to think, you want four unique, distinct pins. So if you make the green, here I'll just go. I'm gonna do a quick save just because, and then I'm gonna go throw down some example greens of stuff that I see somewhat regularly. So I'm just gonna use this green side as an example. We're just gonna drop this all the way down so that there's essentially no auto-gen green there, and what I put down with the splines is all that's there. So I see a lot of greens in submitted courses. Courses that'll look something like this, where it's just absolutely tiny, and there's, like they'll do something like this is a 220-yard par 3, and it's just surrounded by bunkers, and it's just this tiny little thing that you cannot possibly hit and has no strategic value whatsoever. It's just, here's an impossible shot. Hit a tee shot that misses the green, and try and get up and down and take your par. But yeah, it's basic. Yeah, exactly. Just measure your greens. On the very, very small edge in one dimension, you can probably get away with about 12 to 15 yards, I think. At the very least, like if you have a little tiny knoll on one side, the smallest possible green that you can legally make, or and have a legal pin in that spot, is 8 yards wide, because you want 4 yards. A legal pin on tour would be 4 yards from the green edge. So if you have a little circle part that sticks out and you want to stick a tucked pin back there, you have to have 4 yards on either side. So 8 yards total. But in effect, like if you want to make like a really short par 3, or something where you have your approach shot is likely going to be a wedge and you want a small, difficult green, then 12 yards in one direction is about as small as you want. And when I'm doing that, I usually will do something in the neighborhood of 12 by 20. Say if I want like narrow or wide but not very deep, or something that's deep but not very wide. Like that's about what you can realistically work and still have a green that you would have 4 pin spots and is playable, that sort of thing. And then on the bigger side, I'd be a little hesitant to go much bigger than like 40-ish yards in either direction. And when you go over 40, you want the other dimension to be a little smaller. Like I've definitely made greens that are about 50 yards in some dimensions, but usually it's like massively long par 3s, massively long par 4s. Oh yeah, I forgot. I had my fairway all doodled out with my distance tool, and I cleared it as I was. Oh well. I think I know. I think I remember about where it was, so we'll just go redraw it. So yeah, basically just measure your greens. The green size should make sense for the size of the hole. Like if it's a really long par 4, it should have a bigger green. You should be able to hit it from where you expect your players to be landing their tee shots. If it's a really small hole, you don't need a 90-yard wide green. I see a lot of newer guys that will make their what do you want to call it? Their like all of their greens are like 90 plus yards in every dimension. They're just absolutely massive and don't do a whole lot in terms of like they're just big flat things, and those aren't really useful or fun to play either. Oh. Hi Dylan, are you what are you like you were here before, right? Yeah, exactly. 52 by 15, like that's a little wonky, but that could be awesome. Like, there's no hard and fast rules, but generally it's you know, you'll have some general guidelines that make sense. And if you're going outside of those guidelines, generally it's okay, you can that's fine. You just have to have a reason for it. Yeah, exactly. Like if if you find like, oh, this shot's really interesting if you have a crazy wide and narrow green, or like, or it's crazy wide and very shallow, or very long and just uh you know like not very wide, then yeah, exactly. Like those holes can absolutely be awesome. It just needs to be done with purpose. That's all there is to it. Is think about um what the decisions you make on your course mean to how that hole plays. Like if you're if you're the people who play your course are going to take driver out 90% of the time, and from there it's just a flip wedge into the green, then that green doesn't need to be 80 yards in every dimension. Um, if you have a 530-yard par 4, and even with a good drive of players hitting like a hybrid or a fairway wood into it, that green should be bigger. A little 12 by 12 green's not going to cut it for that hole. Basically, it's just does the green that you design make sense for the hole that it's on? That's what it comes down to. Same with fairways as well. If it's a really short hole, you don't necessarily need um, you can get away with some really tricky like tight fairways. If you have a 530-yard par 4, then you shouldn't be pinching driver on that fairway. Like the challenge of that hole is the length. It's just it's planning it out and making sure it makes sense going into it. So there we go. I went ahead and threw down a little fairway here, and we can go play test it. Ooh, yeah, that would be worth a look. Yeah, and Adam makes a good point. Like quirky stuff is good. Stuff that is quirky without any kind of thought behind it is usually not good. If you have a site and it's like, this is a weird little spot, and and it's just it's hard to do something traditional with it, but you have something cool and interesting that works, that's a little outside the ordinary, go for it. That's usually that's where you want your quirk to be on a course. Versus just like, I didn't think about how this hole plays, and so it's a little broken. Now I'm just playing with a little bit of sculpting here just to adjust my sight lines and whatnot. So like, you don't have to do this as much as I do, but it's something to consider of how your course presents itself to the player. Like, what does the tee shot look like? How much of the hole can you see off the tee? And then from where your approach shot lands, how much of the hole can you see from there? If, like, say, if I had this big hill here, like right in front of where your driver would land, and then the green sitting way below that, so that on your approach shot all you see is just this big hill, then it's you can do that. You can have great holes that work that way, but if every single hole on your course is like that, then it's just not going to be interesting to look at. Yeah, and same with like if every tee shot on your course is blind, because like I see another thing that a lot of rookies do is that they'll go very very minimal on their sculpting. So there's lots of, or they might play around with all of the surfaces, but they'll throw the tees down and then they'll just be like this big mound, like just sitting right there in front of all the tees, so that when you tee off, all you just see is like this big hill, just directly in front of the tee box and just nothing. Like it doesn't serve any purpose. It's not strategic. It's just like, hey, I forgot that you should lower this so that you can see the hole. Let's see. The first way to learn is yeah, exactly. Like like taking a great course and reverse engineering it is a great way to learn stuff of like, okay, what did they do here and why? Like that's a great question to ask yourself when you're playing holes that you like. Again, I'm just like, you don't have to get as intricate with it as I do, but you know, like you do want to think about, hey, how does the fairway look? How's it present itself to the player? So in this case, I haven't adjusted any of the tee boxes yet, but from the back tees, you can, like, all of the challenges present themselves. You can see where you're driving it to. Like you can see the hazard that you have to hit over, and then I'm gonna throw a bunker kind of here in this corner, I think, where if you take a conservative line that you might throw it in there. Actually, this still might be too short for what I wanted on this hole. Because I think you're still hitting a flip wedge in. Yeah. But I don't have a whole lot of room to move it, so that might just have to be what it's going to be. Or actually, I'll have to move the planting around a little bit, but I think I can move the tips of this hole to right about here. And that should make it a little more challenging. And it's still not in play for this other hole. Sort of. Exactly. Like it's kind of late in the year anyway, and like it's going to be one of those where what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Yeah, or if you're going into the off season, like you're in upstate New York, you're gonna lose a little bit in the off season anyway. So like this isn't that much different from just going into like an early winter where it's like, okay, well, I don't get to play as much and it's hard to keep in form. Like it happens. Everybody has to do that, and you have to stay sharp in the off season, but it's hard. You can absolutely just hope just kind of pick up from where you left off. All right, so I am raising the land behind this fairway because I want you to be able to see the bunkers. So, general rule of thumb for bunkers, for those of you who aren't familiar with my kind of bunker rules, is 95% of the time you want them to be sloping from one side to the other. Generally, you want the back to be higher than the front. Like for these, for example, all of them will have a higher back and a lower front, both so that you can see them. They present themselves to the player visually, and it lets shots roll in and then gives you a lip that you have to hit over to get out. That like they play well, they look well. It's just that's what you want. Yeah, I mean, you can't think that way, Dylan. You can't play what ifs. Especially you're this young and it's this early. It just, you can't go play what ifs. It's the, okay, this is the challenge that's presented itself. Now how am I going to go deal with it? That's all you can do with it. So don't waste brain power and effort and time thinking about all of the things that you have absolutely no control over and don't really matter at this point anyway. We're going to make a little niche there. I think I like that. Also, general rules for bunkers work about the same as general rules for greens. You know, they need to be a reasonable size. I see a lot of, not a lot, but some newbies tend to make just absolutely enormous bunkers that just don't look right. You're fine. Also, you're a drama queen because you're like 17, and all 17-year-olds are inherently drama queens. It's fine. That's the way it is. I was whiny and dramatic when I was 17. I mean, like I would give you a really good run for your money. I'm still whiny and dramatic. I'm just less so. Exactly. Hello. I don't recognize your name, so I'm assuming that you're new around here, in which case, welcome. Yes. So another thing I like to do with bunkers, which you don't have to, but it's a little tip that I find helps personally, is I'll plan out generally the shape that I want, and I'll do all of the sculpting in it before I ever throw any surface down. Because once you get the surface down, the tools tend to behave a little weirder. Like any kind of sculpting you do will change the depth of your bunkers. Like if you do like just a zero height flatten tool that should just smooth stuff out, it'll actually sink your bunkers deeper. Like the if you want to flatten um, like a bunker and you don't want it to get any deeper, you actually have to raise the or set the brush to raise it like a foot and a half, and it'll even back out. So the easiest way to do bunkers then, in my opinion, is just get all of the major sculpting stuff done before you ever throw the sand in there, and it'll just kind of work. Now you can do this with splines. I just like doing it with the brush because it's just something that carried over from like TGC one, and it lets me do like it gives me a little bit of freedom to do stuff with it that I can't do with the spline tool. Like I can get tighter corners, like that sort of thing. And for the way I make bunkers, I like my tight corners. I like to do little zigzaggy things. There's a big TGC presence on Twitch, sort of. There's, I mean, there's a good handful of streamers. Like we don't have a big audience, but it's a pretty tight little community. Like most of the TGC Tours guys, which if you're not familiar with TGC Tours, you should absolutely look into it. It's wonderful. But most of the guys who design and or play a lot of it, like a handful of them stream, and like a lot of the regulars on Twitch are, they'll pop in and out of all of those channels, that sort of thing. So there's probably like 100 guys. How does how does Nisita meet Olympic Club meet Cypress Dunes meet Pinehurst meet Chambers Bay? I think is that supposed to have a sound at the end of it? I mean, because I don't know if that's a complete question, or at least I'm not following it as one. Like if that's the vibe that you're going for, I would say that's a very busy course idea. Nisita, I suppose like all of those are great courses to pull from, and it could be a great idea. But it's kind of the well, as long as you have it planned out in advance so that you know kind of what you're pulling from. Like that's a lot of stuff to pull from, in my opinion. Like it's very doable. It's just when I'm designing a course, I might like I have my inspirations limited to a couple courses. Like, oh, I'm doing this idea mixed with this other idea. But again, that can absolutely work. now I'm gonna go full Bob Ross for a minute and say that bunker looked lonely. He needs a friend. So I'm gonna throw another little bunker in there. And same thing. I'm like there's kind of an upslope here, so to me that looks like a natural spot to put a bunker. And I'm gonna take the flatten tool and use like this fuzzy brush, drop it maybe a foot or two, and just kind of run it all in and out of the where I want to put the bunker. Just drag it all over the place, and it'll dip that area down. So there, you do that maybe once or twice, depending on how deep you want your bunkers, and bam, you've got like this little nice spot for a bunker already. Now, if you've decided, hey, now that I've done this, it doesn't, like, I've flattened the hill that it was on. I want that hill back. Like, if you want to do little adjustments like that without kind of ruining your bunker pan, I will take the raise tool, do stuff like take this little wide brush and go just click it, like, so that will change the height without like changing all the little local differences. So basically that just raises the back while leaving most of the sculpting untouched. Are there certain sectional bridge types that like take up less um what's it take up less object meter? I honestly do not know. I'm sure somebody knows that, but I don't tend to look into my object meter usage too closely. I very rarely have a problem with it on most of my courses, so I don't tend to really worry about the object meter usage of what I'm throwing in there. I just go by with what looks nice. But it's quite possible that there's some bridges that are just way heavy on object meter. I mean, very probable. Yeah, light art courses are tough, man. I don't know how you guys do them. Those are challenging. Props, where props are due. See, there we go. We'll do a quick play test, and you can kind of see what I mean there. So yeah, like you can see, I might tweak them a little bit. Like I might actually raise the backs even more so that you can see a little bit more of them. You know, like, but from this angle, like the whole definitely like lays out nicely and presents itself in an interesting fashion. Whereas when you go way down, like you can still see it, but it's not quite the same. So we probably want to just raise the backs up a little bit. Because where I put the T's, I don't have the option of bumping the T's up as much. So we're just gonna do like a hill here. And again, same thing. I've already done a lot of my sculpting on this hole, and I don't want to, like, I just want to raise the back without completely flattening out everything I've done. So we're just going to do the raise tool and bump it up a couple feet, in this case about 7, and then bam, it's just everything's sitting nicely. Let's see, I want to widen my fairway area out here a little bit. I think it's just a little narrow. I kind of want to, let's see, something like this. I think. Well, this is a very wide hole. And then it goes into a very narrow spot in that green. I could bring it around like this, maybe. And that could work. How much object meter do you have to start? Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, usually like best case scenario, I think it eats up like 30-40% best case, and usually more than that. Let's just do like a little wavy thing because it's fairway's looking a little straightforward, like just very straight, and you can add a little visual interest with some kind of twists and turns in it. There's nothing wrong with doing perfectly straight fairways if that's the style that you're going for. But but you also want it to be consistent. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I'll just go fill it in with the brush tool for now. Because I forgot to go stretch the spline all the way around and just fill it, but this works too. Nope. Got sloppy with it. Let's see. There we go. That works. And again, this is another, kind of no-brainer spot for a bunker. So we're going to put a bunker here. Oh, that's brutal. That sounds awful. We're going to make a big bunker here that, kind of fills this whole corner. Again, like a rule of thumb I like is you want to minimize just a little bit the interior or the internal volume of your bunkers. Like a lot of people go, I want a bunker here. And it's like, okay, well the fairway curls around, so I'm going to make my bunker look like this. And it's just this massive blob that's very, very hard to sculpt and just looks off. And it's like, you can do that same thing with a bunker that's shaped like this. Something like that. It's like, that's way, way smaller. It's the same hazard. And it looks way better. So again, it's just scaling. If you have a bunker that's 80 yards wide and 80 yards deep, then that's probably going to look weird. Unless it's in a, you can have massive bunkers. It just has to be in a place that makes sense and looks right. That's, also a little subjective. So there we go. We've got the pan flattened out again. And again, getting this just right is a little bit of an art form. So if you don't get it just right, that's okay. Be patient and don't fret if it's not exactly the way you want. There's something to be said for just kind of rolling with what shows up. A lot of times I can't keep an open mind of when you go in and have a concept that you want to do, but you don't always have to get totally locked into doing something exactly as you envision. Sometimes it's not always going to work out the way that you think it is, but if you just roll with it and just work with what kind of comes out, then you can get some really cool stuff. Like in this case, it's like I'll have a rough idea of what I want my bunker to do, but sometimes something just won't really look quite right, or I'm really struggling to get the land or the terrain textures to behave. So you just kind of roll with it and see, play around with it, see if you can get something similar that does behave, or if you just see, oh, well, this doesn't work, but this other thing works, give that a shot. Oh, anyways, no worries. Thanks for stopping by, Dylan. Have a good one. Hope things get better for you. See, how long have I been streaming? Okay, about 50 minutes. Like, I don't have a time limit, but I also want to keep um, this one a little on, I don't need to do a 3 hour stream tonight. If you're watching this as a tutorial, then like have a 3 hour video would just be nuts. So something in the hour to hour and a half range is probably about right. As like that should be about how long it takes to do all the major stuff on this hole that isn't like little detail work. And it's still in depth while being a reasonable length to watch. Do you have good PC specs? I feel like I'm waiting forever for landscape brushing changes. I don't have like the most amazing computer, but it's sort of like a mid-range gaming PC, I guess. Look, like I think I've got maybe a 1070 in this one. So it definitely does pretty good. I don't know exactly the specs. I think it's like an i5 or so, and 1080 or 1070 graphics card. Um, what else? Like I think 16 gigs of RAM, and then it's it's not top of the line or anything, but it's really solid. Yeah, that's a really solid laptop. Yeah, exactly. Yes, I suppose when I say it's not top of the line, I'm comparing it to my old roommate who was very, very into computers and just had like monstrosities of gaming PCs. He had a desktop and a laptop that he had sunk like between the two of them, I think over 6 grand in. So it was just it was a lot of stuff. Yeah, exactly. All right, so I have we're gonna change the path width so that it matches the rest of my cart path. I completely forgot that I had a cart path that I was doing on this course, so I'm gonna go ahead and again, newbie tip for cart paths. If um, you don't have to do cart paths if you don't want to. They're challenging, and a little tedious. If you're not going to take the time to if you don't want to take the time to go like smooth them out and kind of work with them a little bit, I just wouldn't include them. Like a course will look way better without a cart path than if it you know than it will with a cart path that's thrown in and not executed very well. And just as a general rule, I think unless the style of course that you're doing just absolutely just demands a cart path, or you feel like you really need one to frame the holes the way you want, just there's not a whole lot of need for one. I wouldn't worry too much about it. And when you do put in cart paths, like I tend to put my spline points a little further apart than most people. If there's too much space between them, the path will start to get kind of weird and wavy, like it does a little bit here. Um, so I mean that's something to just keep an eye out. When that happens, usually you just want to put your spline points a little bit closer together. In this case, I'm not gonna worry too much about it right now. Like I probably should have put the spline points a little closer together, but we're just doing something quick and dirty for a tutorial. And you want to take your flatten brush and go flatten out your cart path. Because if it's just, it's one of those things you can tell if somebody didn't take the time to, um, to kind of to smooth it out and make it fit. So if you're gonna do it, it looks way way better if you take the time to smooth it out. It'll be flat. It'll fit the terrain, all that stuff. And since fortunately I don't have to do a ton of that, like it's relatively easy to do because I already mostly flatten this area out. So there's not as much stuff to smooth. It's just making it flat so that it's not like angled funny. That's okay. I mean, you can get a decent gaming computer for, um, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by decent, but like I think you can do under $1,000 if you're thrifty about it. But I wouldn't necessarily count on Walmart to have the best quality, you know, stuff. I mean, I'm sure their stuff is fine. I wouldn't. I mean, I'm just hesitant to kind of trust Walmart products in general, not just PCs. Everything that they sell at Walmart's always done on the cheap. So it's all good. Whatever. I'm not. I'm being overly judgmental against Walmart because of my own personal feelings about it. So let's see. Like most, I haven't done the green yet, which I mean, I suppose I can do a little bit of green work since this is about kind of getting the whole complete hole done. So assuming that you haven't really flattened out your course that much, uh, like obviously I can get away with like a couple steps that I would normally do while designing a hole. I don't really have to do for this course because I've already just flattened the land out and then added my own little land movements on top of it. Whereas if you go and lay the splines down on natural terrain and it's still kind of bumpy, you get some really weird fairway edges that like maybe ramp up a cliff or things like that. Sorry, just catching up on chat. But so if it's still very bumpy and whatnot, it's usually well worth it to take the time, take like just this little fuzzy circle brush. You can set it to 0 and just trace over like your light rough cut. Of just that'll flatten it out and smooth it into the terrain. It'll usually look way better than it will if you just leave it in the natural terrain. Again, in this case, like I don't since it was already pre-smoothed out, it's not as important. But for a lot of courses, it's definitely well worth taking the time. And even then, there's still things like, oh hey, I can, like this lip is, like kind of running away a little bit down that hill. Like basically, like in real life, like any kind of mowed area is going to be flat enough that you can run a mower over it. So if you had something like, let's see, we're just going to do a rough brush here. I'm just going to go throw it down like this because, so if your rough cut ends on like this slope here, it's going to look wonky because there's no way you'd ever be able to cut it. So if you have lots of spots where, your fairways, greens, rough cuts, whatever, all end on like really crazy slopes, then, you might want to flatten those out. But anyway, so yeah, and like a tip for greens, I like doing like flatten it first to kind of get it in the general way that you want it. Like again, you want it pretty flat. So flatten tool is your friend at first, and once you get it kind of the way you want it, and you just want to like tweak it and stuff, raise tool is great for that. It'd be like, oh hey, I want to add a break here. You can just like raise it a couple inches, that sort of thing, and just do subtle tweaks without completely undoing all of your sculpting or overwriting. Like I like the raise tool as like a fine tuning mechanism. We're gonna flatten this stuff out a little bit. We'll throw some hills because that's gonna be the end of the course, or the end of the plot. It'll just be city buildings and stuff in the background. So we'll raise that up so you can't, so you just see the tops of the buildings. I could do a little bit of planting here, just for my own, just visually make sure that this works. Now I'm usually, in this case, I'm just shrinking the trees down slightly because the standard ones are a little on the big side. They work great for most courses, but I just found for what I'm trying to do with this one, I want the scale to be a little smaller, and I want the trees to feel a little smaller, so I'm just shrinking those down a little bit. You certainly don't have to do this on any of your courses, and I typically don't do it on a lot of mine. This is just a special case where I think the scale works just a little bit better when it's smaller for this course. Again, I would do something like this all the way around. Like, you can leave the auto-gen trees if you want. I do that on a lot of courses. In this case, I don't know, I just felt like doing it myself versus the auto-gen. So I can use a subset of the trees that the game gives you. And in this case, one of the things I like to do in this theme is, like, I like using these oak trees and maybe something like the elms and stuff. I'll shrink them down and sink them way into the ground so the tops are just poking up. And I use those as kind of big, scrubby, brushy areas. The bushes are also great for this sort of thing, but like a useful, sinking trees into the ground is a useful tool to have in your arsenal. Also, depending on the theme that you're in, like in this case, this one's in countryside, which you can do some cool stuff with. If you like, the more trees you plant, the more it discolors the natural terrain. So all these kind of brown areas are because there's trees on it. And whether or not the trees are above ground or not, it'll still do those. So if you want to like play around with the terrain color and get like kind of dirt, or like, like I think with boreal, it's like pine straw patches, things like that. If you just want to play with the value of the terrain that you have, then just putting trees underground is a great way to do it. But that's kind of more of a little advanced tip. It's absolutely not necessary to make a good course. It's just while I'm working on it, it's a little tip to mention. Anyway, just throwing all that in there so it kind of blocks your sight lines and kind of gives a little like backdrop effect to this hole. Now I would go do that mostly all the way around this left side, but I don't need to do all of that here because we're just trying to keep this short and simple, and I don't need to do all of the really repetitive, tedious stuff. I'm just trying to do all the basics of how you get a hole done and ready to go. So again, I'm just doing a quick play test just to double check. Hey, like, I'll do it a lot of times if I want to see how something looks when you actually go play the hole, or if I make a design change and want to see how it plays. Like in this case, I changed the green up and I threw those trees in the backdrop. I kind of just want to see how do those trees look when you play the course, and how does this green play? And it works fine. So actually, I think the last things I want to do are probably tee boxes and um, what do you want to call it? Heavy rough stuff. So in this case, you can leave the default tee boxes if you want. Like if I'm doing tees like that, I'm gonna. I usually like to just. I don't want to move the tee. I want to tee box settings. I'm gonna do tee box size all the way down to 0, so I can just make them myself. In this case, for this course, I like doing. I'm just going to use the fairway texture for the tee box texture. That they're a little less fancy looking, and which is exactly what I want for this hole. So, or for this course, I mean. In this case, I'll probably throw a tee box here. I kind of like that idea. Maybe we'll do like a kind of sideways one, something like this. And then I'll throw one down here. It's probably a little on the small side. I could adjust the size, but we'll see. I think that's okay. Anyway. So, again, normally I would put more thought into like where I want to put my tees based on like what distances it brings into play, how difficult it makes stuff, etc., etc. For this tutorial, I'm not that worried about it. I can always adjust it later if I don't like the way it plays, but we're just trying to show off the mechanics of it. Like, I don't need to go do all the play tweaking and things like that on stream. So anyway, I usually will like to flatten, and you definitely want to flatten the tee boxes. I'll usually raise them a little bit. Again, like in real life, most tee boxes are going to be slightly raised, so it's nice to be able to go do that. In which case, you just kind of take the flatten tool, bump the edges up. Like, it doesn't have to be a lot. You could raise it a couple feet if you want. You could raise it less than a foot, like I'm doing here, just to flatten it out so it just sits above the terrain that it's in. I mean, sometimes just doing that is more than enough. For sometimes if I want them to really fit smoothly in the terrain, I'll go do the basic bit of it with, with the shapes of the the tee boxes that I'm doing, and then I'll go run around the edges of it with a fuzzier brush, and that'll kind of smooth out the transitions so it runs a little more smoothly into the terrain that it's on. So there we go. All of our tee boxes are flat now. That's a good thing. You should flatten all your tee boxes. They just look better. It's little things. Like if you get the details right, like you do the basics and get the little detail, like basic details right are good. Now, since the plan for this one is to do a lot of heavy rough texturing, like out here. I like the look. It fits the course style. You can do a course that doesn't have any, like that just uses a natural texture for the heavy rough. That's very doable. I've done that many times, but really just depends on the style of the course. Now, if you want to do heavy rough, like a more manicured one, then you kind of have to be careful with how that interacts with your hole. Now, if you just go from fairway straight into the heavy rough, you're not going to have any issues. You can just like drop your fairway in and then go drop your heavy rough directly over top of it, and you'll be just fine. Like, you won't get any weirdness or anything like that. But when you go and try and run it like what I'm going to do right here, just run it right into your light rough. You're going to get all, it's going to mess with the edges. You're going to get all these little wavy, runny stuff. You know, some more severe than others. Like if I go do it here, um, yeah, like it'll ruin all of your nice, neat edges, and it'll get kind of wonky. So, sadly, the only real trick for doing that is to just trace around it, so that they don't really intersect. You can get the textures, like when you have a light rough band, it'll give you just a little bit of a heavy rough edge around it at all times, or all the time, whatever. So in this case, absolutely not necessary, but a little trick I like to do when I am edging a fairway and throwing heavy rough around it, I like to use that white rough color, because then it's really, really easy to see. I can trace around it, and it's really easy to tell if it moves, like right there. So I know if I got too close and started screwing up the fairway edges. It's really easy to tell. So yeah, like if I'm going to go do all the heavy rough for this hole, I'd probably fill the whole area that this hole's in. But you just got to kind of start by tracing around the fairways. And just making sure that you know, like if you do it right, it's a little tedious, but you can get the heavy rough to run right up to the edge of your fairway. You won't be able to tell visually that that they're not technically touching, but in this case I want to leave that kind of dirt bank, so I'm just running the heavy rough right up to the edges of that as well, but not like all the way to the water edge like that. I want to leave a little bit of a rock bank there. Oh yeah, on the subject of tee boxes, if you're throwing tee boxes down, like if you're doing a green, or like a green texture, or a fairway texture directly into the terrain, you either want a little band of light rough around it or heavy rough around it, because it'll just leave these big ugly brown outlines on it that you don't want. So just be mindful of those. In this case, I'm putting heavy rough down on the entire course, so we're good there. But if I just wanted to leave this on the natural terrain, I would do just something like this, where you just trace the heavy rough around it, and that'll fade nicely into the terrain. And then, so that there's at least a nice edge there. There's not that big brown stripe around it. Like alternatively, let's say you just used like green for your tee boxes, and you throw a shape down there. You can always just do a light rough band around it, like yay, and then that gets rid of your big black artifacts, because or the big brown ones, because anytime you throw a light rough down, it throws just a little bit of a heavy rough transition into it. So those are two easy ways to get rid of those big brown boxes around your tee boxes. So again, I don't need to do all of this. That's, a little slow and tedious, and I don't need to fill the show up with that, but I wanted to kind of walk you through how you can get some clean, nice looks on your courses with the tools and stuff. It's just, the textures interact weirdly, and they've done it since TGC 1. It's just kind of how it is, and it doesn't make sense, and I have no idea why, but it is what it is. So there we go. Like you can see, the tee boxes are flat. They sit up nicely on the terrain. They run into the surroundings nicely. There aren't this kind of like stock or default texture artifacts left. Cart path is kind of flattened out. All the sculpting on the whole makes sense. It's framed nicely for the most part. Like it's a solid, nice golf hole. Now, obviously, there's a lot of work to do. I haven't multi-pinned it yet. I haven't done any kind of I've done the majorish green sculpting of hey, it's flat and it plays, but I haven't finalized it yet. I tend to do those last. You don't have to, but I just find it makes it easier. Because if you tweak as you go, then anytime you do any tweaks with your hole, you're going to completely ruin the greens that you did, and you're going to have to go back over and redo them. So I always just do it last. You get the major stuff done, and then you go back and fine tune it as you go. You know, I'd probably obviously I would do trees pretty much all the way around. Um, I'm not gonna go do all the planting now. I'm kind of at that point where I think we're probably good for this stream. Uh, uh, I might I can keep working and stuff, but I think this is all the basics of how you'd construct a hole from start to finish. Um, I mean, it's not the most in-depth tutorial, but assuming you've watched, say, Andre's stuff, it's more just a, hey, here's an addendum on my thoughts on, basic construction techniques. It's worth looking into type thing. So, yeah, again, it's a promising start. It's it's a very straightforward hole, but that's kind of how I want this course to play, and it looks nice. The mission accomplished here, in that it looks like a golf course that you could play. It's a municipal course. It looks kind of like a nice municipal course. But anyway, so if for the folks in the chat, I'm just gonna cut the stream and pop right back on. Um, for those of you who are watching this on playback and or YouTube or whatever, thank you for tuning in to the joy of planting. Hopefully, I'll see you again later. But yeah, again, hopefully this was helpful. If not, then Andre's got some great tutorials. If you're looking for something more in depth, like this is kind of intended to be a little bit of a 101 course, but most of my other Joy of Planting episodes go into a little bit more advanced techniques and things like that. So if you want some more in-depth ideas, techniques, whatever, you can check out some of my other videos. But anyway, thanks for stopping in, and have a good one. I'll talk to you later.